Good afternoon and welcome to the celebration of the life of Graeme Lumsden. Says something that there's so many people here. Can you hear people here? All right. Can you hear me at the back?
Yes.
Very good, thank you. A few just housekeeping issues. There's a handicapped toilet just out that door there. There's also locker rooms downstairs. There's the gents are down there, and also the gents are down the main staircase at the back, and the ladies are off to the left of the main staircase down the back. If we can keep use of the handicapped toilets to those who are genuinely needing to go there rather than walk downstairs, that would be appreciated. And the other thing is that the fire exits are out where you came in and also down the stairs at the back there. Hope we don't need to use those, but I've got a risk management background. And now I'll hand you over to Yang Ray. Yang Ray is the minister of the Killara Uniting Church, which Mum and Dad have been attending as part of the congregation for quite some years. I'm not sure how many now, must be 20 or 30.
Thank you, Andrew. Graeme John Lumsden was born on 7th June 1933 and was called to rest on 26th July this year at the age of 90. We have gathered here to remember Graeme and thank God for his life with us. Graeme was a devoted and loving husband of Janet, wonderful father of Andrew and Michael, father-in-law of Debbie and Becky, cherished grandfather of Isabel, Dave, Jack, and Lenny and Sophie, great-grandfather of Ellie, George, and little Harry, much loved brother of Robin, and our dear faithful member of the church. As Andrew introduced, my name is Yang Ray, minister to Killara Uniting Church, where Graeme and Janet have been worshipping for many years, for many decades. In the name of Jesus Christ, and also on behalf of the Lumsden family, I welcome every one of you to this worship service and those who are joining us online. May I invite you to turn to your order of service on back page. You can find responsive reading Psalm 63. This psalm is well used for those people on the journey from a number of different places toward Jerusalem, reminding themselves we are people on the journey, pilgrimage, one place, another place. I'm sure I used this psalm when Graeme was about to leave. This psalm reminds us we move one place to another place. It is my prayer that today's worship service and gathering memorial service may remind us we are also on this journey toward our Creator. Let us read this psalm responsively, and your responses are written in bold letters. O God, you are my God, eagerly I seek you.
My soul thirsts for you, my flesh faints for you, as in a barren and dry land where there is no water.
Therefore I have gazed upon you in your holy place.
That I might behold your power and your glory.
For your loving kindness is better than life itself.
My lips shall give you praise.
So will I bless you as long as I live.
And lift up my hands in your name.
My soul is content as with marrow and fatness.
My mouth praises you with joyful lips.
When I remember you upon my bed,
And meditate on you in the night watches.
for you have been my helper.
And under the shadow of your wings I will rejoice.
My soul clings to you.
Your right hand holds me fast.
Thank you, Andrew.
In your responses to the invitation, many of you said kind and true words about Graeme. Here are some of them. Cheerful, friendly, a lovely man, calm, a good listener, emanating of wise decency, a real gentleman. To me, Dad was a perfect father, a very fine fellow. Graeme and Janet were a loving couple for over 70 years. I couldn't have chosen better parents. Everybody who met Graeme liked and respected him. I win the prize for the shortest eulogy ever, but that's what happens if you're perfect. Dad often told stories of his childhood in Adelaide. It was a different era. For example, during World War II, aged 6 to 12, Graeme went on the overnight train to Melbourne or Ballarat to stay with his grandparents. The soldiers who populated the train looked after him and made sure he got off at the right stop. On one occasion, he managed to sleep quite well in the luggage rack. During primary school, he got his first part-time job. I'll repeat that again. During primary school. Most of us start work a bit later than that these days. He got his first part-time job. He helped deliver milk. The milkman had a horse and cart. Dad used to run to and from the houses, pouring milk into containers left out overnight. He got paid 20 cents a day. The early 1950s saw him rapidly transit into adulthood. In 1950, Dad started work aged 16, processing cheques in the Commonwealth Bank. Processing cheques is dull work, I know, because I did exactly the same role 25 years later. But staff could not go home until the entire department's work was finished. Everybody pulled together to achieve an early departure. Dad said this really taught him the benefits of teamwork. Didn't quite sink in with me. 1951, Graeme met Janet. Dad first noticed her playing tennis at the Methodist church. Mum was playing, not him at that stage. Legend has it that they fell in love whilst folding a tablecloth in the church hall. 1952, the Commonwealth Bank transferred Dad to Clare, 150 kilometres from Adelaide. He lived in a boarding house. Hot water for baths and showers, etc., could only be obtained by chopping wood and lighting a boiler. They did this once a week on the day of the weekly Clare dance. Each weekend, Graeme rode his motorbike down to Adelaide to see Janet. On one occasion, returning to Clare, he fell asleep on his motorbike, went off the road, woke up, and managed to get back onto the road unscathed. Clearly, living in Clare wasn't going to be viable. Dad quit the Commonwealth Bank. Shortly after, he joined the NLC. After that came marriage, family, and his professional life. And we'll hand over to Sophie, who's going to read some words from his sister, Robin.
Okay, so this is my brother Graeme as remembered by his sister Robin. As siblings, Graeme and I had very little in common, as he was 5 years my senior. Memories I still have of him, though, were him using my much-loved fluffy koala bear toy and kicking it into our side hedge, never to be seen again. I was devastated. Then, as I grew older and our mother decided I was to become a lady, he took pleasure in bringing his friends around to my bedroom window, where I endeavoured to practice ballet and elocution. They thought it was hilarious to try pirouettes and recite "How now, brown cow," with the effort of a plum in their mouths. The laughter that ensued only made me more determined not to become a lady. As we grew up, our attitude to one another started to change. Graeme was far more interested in school and achieved much better results at high school than me. Having a Latin teacher who had written the book he studied meant he went to bed with the book under his pillow. It was the last thing he read at night and the first thing that he read in the morning. Being in the class, he was referred to by his teacher as the cream of the state. Fear was driven into the students by telling them the cream of the state will not go sour, enough to frighten any student. Graeme also always loved the game of tennis, born out of the fact that he still played into his senior years. Having church tennis at the back of our home meant he had easy access to practice. I cannot remember ever playing tennis with Graeme, but it is something I wish I would have liked to have done. In my early teenage years, when I was probably about 13, I have the fondest memory of Graeme. It was Christmas, and he had spent some of his well-earned pay purchasing a leather-bound copy of Wind in the Willows, which he gave to me with the inscription, "A well-written book, one from which you can always enjoy pleasure. Take care of this one, your brother Graeme." I've treasured this gift and read it so many times, and how right Graeme was. Growing older meant we did have our own lifestyles, and his marriage to Janet and the births of their 2 sons brought him so much pleasure and a whole new outlook on life. It was also the beginning of his employment transfers between Sydney and Melbourne. It was during these years I realised what a remarkable brother he was. The best memories of Graeme in our later years were his incredible patience with older people. He would go out of his way to collect elderly ladies who required a lift in his car and take them to a performance at the local theatre. He always looked after them like a true chauffeur. His continuing interest in the busy lives of Andrew and Michael as they continued in their fields of employment and sport, both excelling at the latter. Assisting Janet with her many interests, particularly Ionians and the church markets. His love of a good live theatre, and always ensuring he got there on time, to the extent that he did a practice run the day before. We were meant to go to dinner and a show at a distant theatre from St Ives. Like his father, he was not a great fix-it man. I think that runs in the family of the Lumsdens, but it amazed me how Janet would always come to his rescue, and in no time she would have fixed what Graeme had been struggling with for ages. His love and joy of his grand and great-grandchildren, they gave him so much joy, and he became one of the best pa's going, and I can attest to that. He so enjoyed walking, particularly in the latter stages of being able to do this. Other walkers got to recognise him, and daily pleasantries were exchanged. These walks always finished at a local coffee shop, where staff would be waiting with his morning coffee. But the action I shall most remember Graeme for was his incredible knowledge of Sydney's quietest weekend beaches, one where we could go for a delightful picnic without masses of other people. Apparently, these discoveries were made by Janet and Graeme during their early days in Sydney, when they would go out exploring their new environment. These were wonderful times with a special lunch packed by Janet. And why were they so special? Well, I'm not really sure. Maybe it was because we were all so relaxed and able to enjoy each other's company without any pressures. But they really were so very special. I will miss these good times and the pleasure of the company of my older brother, Graeme. I think Ivan is next with Graeme at work.
Good afternoon, everybody. As you can see from the order of service, my name is Ivan Barr, and my connection to Graeme goes back almost 38 years. In fact, my first day in Australia after migrating from South Africa. I'm sitting at my desk. I've got piles of books and papers to read, not sure where I'm going to start, and I hear a bit of a noise. I look up and there's this friendly, smiley face looking at me. Graeme introduces himself and tells me he knows that I come from an environment where superannuation was not known. It's not a word that we in South Africa knew about. We called it pension, as did most of the world, but no, Aussies had to have this thing called super. So he says to me, basically there are 3 types of super allowed for in the Tax Act in Australia. There's corporate superannuation, there's superannuation for individuals who don't belong to a corporate super fund, and there are super for self-employed. And he said, and he's got a piece of paper in his hand, a blank piece of paper and a pen. He says, if you give me a few moments, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to fill out this piece of paper, and at the end of the day, you will understand exactly how the tax of these 3 different types of super are carried out. I said, fine, I've got nothing else to do. And I must tell you, he was right. He drew this up. I referred to that piece of paper for the first month or so, virtually every day. And I absolutely kept that piece of paper, and it really, really focused in on what super was in 1986. Andrew mentioned that Graeme's first professional working was with the CBA, Commonwealth Bank in Adelaide. But I'm going to start off when he joined the MLC in Adelaide in 1952. Now, I want to just introduce a little bit of jargon over here. At that stage, there were 2 types of life insurance in Australia. There's what was referred to as ordinary business, and that's the insurance that we know today. Basically, you couldn't do it online in those days, but you could go into an office and buy it. It could be sold to you by an agent. And then there was a quirk, I would say, which was very, again, typical from Britain. Britain came down to Australia and was known as collector business or industrial business. And this is where you had agents walking the streets, knocking on doors, selling insurance, and then would come around, usually on a Friday, and collect the premium. So this was collector business. Graeme believed his professional career really started in 1957, at the age of 24, when he was appointed as the industrial branch, or the collector branch, agency office. The story he told me, and I must say in his latter years he would repeat the story over and over again, and he tells me that he remembers well the appointment. His father actually worked for Colonial Mutual from the age of 14 to 65. And when Graeme joined the MLC, his father said to him, if you can, avoid getting involved in the collector business. So we now have the situation of the state manager in South Australia, which is almost equivalent, Reverend, to God, calling Graeme into his office. The gentleman's name was Mr. Gordon. And he says, Graeme, I want you to become the industrial branch agency officer. So Graeme says, oh, Mr. Gordon, I'm not sure I want to do that. So Mr. Gordon says, Graeme, I'm not asking you what you want. I want you to take over as IB agency officer. End of conversation, but it turned out to be a brilliant opportunity for Graeme. So why do I say it was a brilliant opportunity for Graeme? Well, from this professional career of his, he was getting plenty of experience in managing and developing his team. And those of you that have known Graeme would know that he did this damn well. He was dealing with customers face to face. He had regular contact with agents and their supervisors. They were called superintendents in those days. And he would help them with their problems and their questions. He also got on well with the guy by the name of, who was the divisional inspector, who was in effect the head of IB in Adelaide, who was the same age as Graeme's father and therefore had lots and lots of experience. How Graeme organised this never really came out, but he managed to convince the state manager that he would like to spend time in what we call in the field. In other words, not sitting behind a desk, but getting out there with the real world. And from that, he gained an understanding of what the agents and their supervisors actually did on a day-to-day basis. This taught Graeme respect and earned his respect. He actually respected what was being done out there, and the guys out there absolutely respected him for it. This respect was a key and common factor throughout his life, not only in his professional career, but those again of you that knew him well would agree with me in his personal life as well. In 1960, basically July 1960, he then moved to Sydney, and he now moved out of collector business into what was then called the ordinary branch. At the same time, he was handed some tools which were referred to as group life insurance and trust deeds for corporate superannuation. Neither of these was something that he knew about in the Adelaide office. But Graeme being Graeme, he grabbed it with both hands. Because at this time, the government of the day was changing the Tax Act to bring in these three types of insurance, types of superannuation that I spoke about at the beginning that he explained to me. It was the corporate super, the self-employed super, and super for people who didn't have their own. At the ripe old age of 34, Graeme was promoted back to the Melbourne branch, so not back, but went to the Melbourne branch, and he became the super manager for Victoria. In 1970, he actually was promoted to a larger role. This time he became a ordinary business agency manager. He was given 6 divisions to run, some were within metropolitan Melbourne and some were in other parts of Victoria. And he really enjoyed his time as an agency manager because not only was he within the metropolitan part of Victoria, but he managed to get out of the country. He learned a lot about selling, human nature, passion and enthusiasm from the agents and the divisional sales managers he worked for. Looking back, he would often say that this is the part of his career at MLC that he enjoyed the most. Well, that came to the end. 5 years later, he was asked to come back to head office. After moving back to Sydney in 1977, he became the superannuation manager for New South Wales. So again, back on the front line, dealing with agents, existing customers and new ones. He then became a regional sales manager for the Sydney region. Unfortunately, MLC now hit a bit of a bad patch, and they were bought out by Lend-Lease. Some will say they were rescued by Lend-Lease. But as a result, there was an enormous amount of restructuring and redundancies. After a few weeks in his role, Graeme thought to himself, this is not right, something's going to go wrong here. And he said that in his mind, in 1984, he would be basically cutting field staff. And he reckoned at the end of that made him redundant. So after 31 and a quarter years with MLC, on the 31st of December 1983, he resigned from MLC. Fortunately for him, he was gaining a reputation as an expert in superannuation. So on the 1st of January 1984, basically the next day, maybe 2 days later, being a public holiday, he joined a company called Aetna Life and Casualty as the super manager for New South Wales. Let me just bring Aetna Life and Casualty into context. You had the large life offices, AMP, National Mutual, MLC, Colonial Mutual. Compared to them, Aetna was a very, very small operation in Australia. But they were huge worldwide, especially in their home country of the United States. Aetna operated on what was called an open agency system in Australia. The MLCs, the AMPs, National Mutuals, Colonial Mutuals, their agents could only sell the products of the companies that they worked for. Aetna was different. As an Aetna agent, you could sell Aetna product, but you could also sell products of other insurance companies if they were allowed you to do so. So all of a sudden now he was working with a different type of agent. Some of these agents were similar to what he was used to at MLC, and they, in the individual right, they sort of worked within Aetna offices, but most of them worked in other professionals. They were in accounting practices, general insurance brokerages, and also some of them worked together in a loose association as independent agents. Now, this is about the time that I joined Aetna at head office, and Graeme was now the manager, had been promoted to be the manager of employee benefits for Australia. Employee benefits is very much an American term. Again, if you think of Aetna being an American company, worldwide they use the term employee benefits, as they were very big, especially in the US, in providing retirement and health benefits for employees of companies. 1988, we had what we call the agency war. AMP and National Mutual decided they both wanted to become bigger, and they were going to basically grow. And they went out and they basically, I'll use the word, poached agents. Aetna had one of the best field forces of agents in Australia at the time, and these AMP and National Mutual guys were coming with checkbooks, big checks, and they were taking the Aetna agents. So Aetna really was suffering. Our US parent at the time decided enough's enough, and they put us up for sale. Late in 1988, Prudential, a large British office which had a smallish operation in Australia, made an offer to buy Aetna. And I can remember very well, the management team were called into the conference room, and in walks this guy from America. He was really a big guy. We discovered afterwards that he was in the American Navy, and we wondered if he wasn't a SEAL. But he sits down, takes off his coat, and Graeme, who I was sitting next to at the time, whispered to me, "Boy, are we in trouble." And I said, "Graeme, why?" He says, "That guy's too conservative for my likings." I said, "What do you mean, Graeme? I can't see anything." He says, "Look at him. He's wearing pants with a belt, and he's got braces." Something's going to go wrong. Graeme was right. What happened was we heard that Prudential had made an offer, and we left for Christmas that year, Christmas '88, literally with an axe hanging over our head. We had no idea what was going to happen. So we came back to work in 1989, and yep, they told us the deal was being done, and you know, these things take a time, but probably in 6 months, Aetna will be gone and Prudential will take us over. The senior management team were approached by Prudential. Some were offered redundancies, some were offered jobs with Prudential. Graeme decided to go ahead with Prudential. I didn't, incidentally, but Graeme did. However, only about 6 months later, he was then offered another job with Westpac. Westpac Bank had entered the life insurance area and had created a company called Westpac Life. And they were looking for someone to help them develop their superannuation business. And Graeme was offered this role. Now, with Westpac Life, the agents that they were using, they had in effect managed to convince from other insurance companies to join them. The problem was these Westpac Life agents were used to selling individual plans, not superannuation. Frankly, the commission on individual life policies was better than the commission on super. So that wasn't working. So what Graeme had to do was he had to create his own team, and he inherited, in effect, bank employees to go out and sell their super plans. The theory was that the employees in the bank branches would create the lead for these guys to work on. Now, later on, at the end of 1990, he again got a promotion where he was asked to mentor all the superannuation managers in the whole of Australia. So again, he did a lot of travelling, which I know he enjoyed, and he worked with the state managers and the employees around the country. However, at the ripe old age of 60, in 1993, times weren't good for Westpac. Again, those of you who were around, you may remember there was talk of Westpac was really in trouble. They were rescued by a number of institutions, and Graeme decided enough, and he resigned. When Graeme was at Aetna, he befriended a particular individual, Peter, who had now become a financial advisor at JB Ware and Son. And coincidentally, about 9 months previously, Peter had contacted Graeme to say, do you know of anybody who I could use to help me run planning sessions for superannuation? So Graeme now picks up the phone and calls Peter and says to Peter, hey, this conversation we had 9 months ago, did you ever find anybody? And Peter said no. Graeme was available. Graeme had a job. So as this is the time now where super is really being developed in Australia, and Graeme was working with the JB Ware officers to educate the employers of small to medium businesses on arranging the superannuation. You may remember this is when compulsory super was coming in, so there were lots of changes. However, Westpac came back to Graeme again and offered him another role, which he took, and that was to work with what was called the business bank of Westpac, to work with companies with 10 or more employees, small and medium size, to develop more and more super for Westpac. It was hard work, they were making progress, but again, Graeme didn't believe that there was going to be a future with this part of Westpac. So in Christmas of 1995, he was offered another role. This was a company called Hannon Superannuation, which was a subsidiary of the Hannon General Insurance Brokerage. And they were looking at someone to work with a general insurance brokerage to contact the companies that they were their clients and sell them or work with them with super, which is what Graeme did. And Graeme told me, I remember saying that at the end of 1996, about August to be precise, that he had gone to see every single one of Hannon's small and medium-sized customers. And every single one of those had now set up a super fund for their clients. So to quote Graeme, my job was done. There was nothing else on offer. It was time to retire. I'd like to finish off and share a note with you that Janet shared with me. Janet received a message from a lady called Anne. And Anne worked in Graeme's team many, many years ago. And I'd like to, if you'll bear with me, I'd like to just read this note to you. Dear Janet, I am so sorry to hear about Graeme. I just want to say that I was extremely fond of Graeme. I have been forever grateful for him giving this young English woman who had just arrived in Australia a chance. He knew that I knew nothing about Australian tax and regulations and this thing Aussie calls super. Graeme was actually my boss's boss, but Graeme was a great national sales manager and always wanted to help everyone at the grassroots level, sharing with us the benefits of his years of wisdom and experience. He loved drawing a picture, don't I know that? And that stayed with me for my entire career. He was also a lovely, polite and gentle man, a real people's person and liked by everyone. I am so sorry to hear of his passing, and it must be a very sad time for you, but I think I'm right in saying that you have a wonderful, close family, so I hope that the love of the family that you and Graeme have brought into this world will support you through these tough days. I will also say a prayer for you and Graeme. Anyway, I am sending you and your family my heartfelt condolences, love and prayers. Take care, Anne. To the Lumsden family, I wish you all well and thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk about my great friend, Graeme. Thank you.
Thank you. That was very educational. I learned a lot about my dad and where he was all that time when I was at home, wondering where he was. I'm Michael, Graeme's youngest son. thanks to everyone for coming along today, and for those people who are tuned in on the video connection, or whatever you call it. It's great, and we really appreciate you coming along to celebrate Dad's life. So where to begin? I thought I'd take you back to 1965, and we're in the easement next to our house in West Ryde, and Dad, as he used to love to do, has just been cutting the grass. He's been using his Victor mower, and that machine would be a part of Dad's life for about the next 40 years. It was light, it was simple, it had a pull cord, starter, didn't have a catcher, didn't have any guards. In the wrong hands, it was a lethal machine. But Dad managed it carefully, and together he and the mower kept the gardens neat and tidy in West Ryde, then Blackburn, and then Melbourne, and then back to Keith Street and Linfield. The mower was kind of typical of Dad. It lasted because he looked after it, and he could tell its story. He used to tell us where he bought it, how much he paid for it, and he could remember all of those things. He loved telling stories, my father, and we loved hearing them. Even for the umpteenth time, we loved hearing them. A few years ago, over dinner, we got Dad talking, and he recounted the story of his courtship with Mum. Some of it we've covered, but they met at tennis, and he recounted that they went out to see a movie, I think, on their first date. Mum, what was the name of the movie, can you remember? Mudlark. You can get it on Netflix, I think. We'll look at it later. So they travelled around Adelaide together. Dad had a motorbike, Mum was in the sidecar. Is that right? The pinion to begin with, and then graduated to the sidecar. And as Andrew recounted, he rode his motorbike for 90 miles from Clare to come and see Mum on a Saturday evening, and they would go out and he would ride his 90 miles back to work in his job at the Commonwealth Bank. And then Dad, to quote him, he said that after 8 months of doing that trip every weekend, he decided he loved Janet more than the Commonwealth Bank. And he quit, and he got a job in Adelaide, and they were married soon after. He told the story of how his dad had worked for the Colonial Mutual Life for 51 years and had told him to get a job at the MLC. Funnily enough, my first job was at the AMP. Papa lasted 51 years at the CML. Dad was at the MLC for 31 years, I think, if I was paying attention. And I lasted 3 months at the AMP. He told us about buying the first house that they had, Mum and Dad had together, and he told us about his childhood train trips that Andrew's covered from Adelaide to Melbourne or Ballarat in the war years. He also told us about his South Australian football umpiring days. He started off as a field umpire, but then decided to become a boundary umpire. And to be a boundary umpire in the South Australian Football League, you had to be able to run a mile in under 5 minutes, and Dad was able to do that. When we were having this conversation, Dad had already had the early symptoms of Alzheimer's, so his short-term memory wasn't that great. But he had vivid memories of some things going back. And he recalled his final game as a boundary umpire was an exhibition game between the Victorian Premiers, which was Melbourne, and the South Australian Premiers, Port Adelaide. It was on a Friday night in 1955 at Norwood Oval. And there'll be some people here who appreciate this from South Australia. So Dad recalled the game. He said the Melbourne team got off to a fast start, and he had to run the ball as a boundary umpire from one end of the ground 7 times in the first quarter. He picked up the ball after they kicked a goal, ran it up, gave it to the central umpire. Now the thing is, Dad had ridden his bike to work that day, and then he'd ridden his bike to the game. So he said by quarter time, after doing 7 sprints from one end of the field to the middle, he'd pretty much had it. And he recalled that Melbourne won the game right at the end. So given Dad's memory was a bit dodgy by that point when he was telling me the story, I thought I'd check it. So I Googled this game. And what I found was that the match was held on the 5th of October 1955 in front of a crowd of about 20,000 people. And after Melbourne had raced away to an early lead, the locals struck back, and with a minute left, the scores were level. And with the ball in Port's forward line, John Beckwith kicked from defence to Frank Adams, who went forward and scored a point to give the Demons a 1-point win and the unofficial title of Champions of Australia. So Dad's memory of the night was quite vivid, and although Alzheimer's is a strange disease, and although his memory was failing a bit, at that point in his life he could recall things from his younger days very clearly. Listed in the best players was a bloke named Ron Barassi from that match, and I reckon that Dad will have told Ron his story when Ron arrived in heaven just after Dad, and no doubt though Dad will be hearing some good ones from Ron as well. Dad loved his football, Aussie rules. He was in the standing room section at the MCG supporting Collingwood in 1970 with 110,000 other people when Carlton came back to beat his team, Collingwood, after being 7 goals behind at half-time. He took Andrew and I to VFL games around Melbourne, but mostly he would take us to see our teams play. For me it was Richmond, and for Andrew, unfortunately, it was Fitzroy. And then on a Saturday night, the standard fare was fish and chips in front of the football replay, as it was back in those days. You could watch all the games because they all happened at the same time on the one day of the week. Later, he would come and watch the Swans with my kids at the SCG and with me, and he loved watching Jack play football for St Ives, North Shore and Manly. And he was also a regular at Isabel's netball, Sophie's tennis, Jack's cricket, rugby, whatever sports were going, the kids were into, Dad was always there. I want to take you back to days in Melbourne, and Andrew and Mum and Dad, and we're all in the car, and it's a Sunday, and we're going for a drive. It could have been the blue HR Special Holden that we had with the white roof, or it could have been the white Chrysler Valiant that he bought from Jim Gaskin, who was a friend of the family. And the Valiant had a Dodge truck engine in it, apparently, and Dad used to love telling that story. Anyway, we're out in the car and we're going to visit friends, which was something that we used to do a lot of on a Sunday. We'd go and visit friends. We didn't always tell them we were coming, I don't think, did we, Mum? Imagine doing that these days, just rocking up for someone's house, but that's how it was. And we'd go and see the Champions, we'd go and see the Barbers, the Mayors, the Wymans, all around Melbourne. And we'd always have a football in the car, and on this occasion I'm wearing my Richmond jumper, and I've got my Ron Barassi plastic football boots on. And we're playing football on the oval next to the Wyman's house in Ringwood in Melbourne, and I get accidentally knocked over by one of Mr. Wyman's adult friends. I'm winded and there's tears rolling down my cheeks. Dad, being an umpire, was right on the spot. Called a free kick, and I got up, dusted myself down, wiped my eyes and my tears off my cheeks, went back and kicked a goal from 5 metres out, and everything was okay again. Dad had a way of making things okay, and he would do it over and over again throughout my life when things were rocky, with jobs or sports, relationships, when I needed help with the kids or work around the house. and with the education costs for the kids, whatever it was, Dad and Mum were always there for us. Another long drive we did one Christmas. We drove from Sydney to Adelaide in his old Holden with Dolphy Loy, while Mum and Auntie Jean made the trip by plane. There was Andrew, me, Andre and Michael, so 6 of us in the car, careering halfway across the country. No motels, no hotels. We just stopped by the side of the road, slept under the stars or on the back seat of the car. That's how we travelled in those days. But visiting family was a huge part of our lives. Drives to Adelaide were annual events from Sydney or Melbourne, and more regular drives to places, Baronia and the foot of the Dandenongs, to see our aunties, Grace or old Nana Lumsden. Drives to Ballarat to see Auntie Bev and Uncle Ray, Auntie Reen, Maeve, Harold. Our trips to Adelaide were always great fun, seeing Mum's family there, and Robin, of course, who we heard from. Mum, with her being the youngest of 5 sisters and brother, presenting an endless supply of cousins to indulge me. They were all older than me. And on one trip we stayed at the Brennan's house in Brighton while they were away, and we had a family gathering on the back lawn with all the cousins, all the aunties and the uncles. Dad went off to the fish shop to buy 40 pieces of fish and enough chips to go around for everyone. That was another story that Dad used to tell on a fairly regular basis. We also did trips in our caravans. First the old plywood one, and then the shiny new white coronet aluminium one that Mum and Dad designed and had built in Ballarat. I can still see the lovely orange vinyl seats and beds from the 1970s. That was the era when Dad grew his hair. He had sideburns, he wore suede jackets, and he had pink suits. I love those old photos. In the caravan we went to Bright, all the way to Newcastle to stay with the Woolards, and the caravan was our portable home in Adelaide when we stayed with family there, the Telfers in McLaren Vale, the Nesbitts in Glenelg. Saturday afternoons were tennis for Dad, for as long as I can remember, in Melbourne at Blackburn, and then in Sydney at Tryon Road, and then Dr. Cowlishaw's Court, and then later at Roseville Park. The tennis was social and mixed predominantly, and Dad played until he was deep into his 80s, and we'll hear more about that. He would always give me a summary when I spoke to him after tennis. He'd say, I played 3 sets, 1-2, lost 1, but I held my serve. It was social tennis, but Dad was always quietly competitive. And he played midweek as well at night during his working life, and then during his retirement he played during the day. Dad was often the organiser, treasurer, president. He was finding new recruits to join the tennis when the social numbers dwindled. Dad and I played 2 tennis competitions together at Roseville Lawn Tennis Club on Friday mornings. It was a businessman's comp. This was when Dad was still working, I think at Westpac at the time. So Dad was my partner, and we won the competition twice. We only played it twice, we won it twice. And I don't remember us being beaten at doubles, Dad and I. He was a very good doubles player. And that was 33 years ago, and I remember it like yesterday. Dad was incredibly supportive of my sporting endeavours. Aussie rules as a school kid and cricket through the years. He took me for a practice session at Roseville Park in the nets on the evening before the first year in under 16 for West Pymble when we were in the final. I was opening the batting the next day. So Dad was doing throwdowns and then bowling a few balls to me. And one of them was a head-high full toss, straight at my nose. And I managed to fend it off with my bat, and it got a top edge and it went out of the nets, and it went high, sailed high and long, and landed on the roof of a car in a house 2 doors down towards Archibald Road. Bang, left a dent. So soon after that, the council put a wire cage on the top of the nets, surprisingly, which I've always dedicated to Dad. I made 48 in the grand final and we won the game, so thanks to my preparation with Dad, that was great. It was about my highest score ever in cricket, I think. Just harking back to those days, I'd like to just welcome David Laundry, who's a great friend of mine from those days of cricket at West Pymble, and he's here today, and sadly his dad passed away the same week as my dad, so thoughts with you, David. Our parents were good friends, and I'm sorry that we couldn't be here for his farewell for Norm. Dad has actually asked that his ashes are spread around Roseville Park. It was where Dad ended up playing tennis. It was where Dad and I kicked the football. It was where Dad watched me play cricket in rep cricket for Gordon. It was where I played my last ever game of cricket for Roseville Shires. It was where he took Isabel and Jack and Sophie to the swing park, and where he took our dog Lucky for his walks and for a run off the lead. It was also a place where Dad and Mum had many meals in the restaurant once that opened, where the greenkeeper's house had been. Roseville Park was a place that Dad loved, just so close to our old home. As has been said, Dad was a great communicator, not only with the stories he loved to tell, but in writing too. He would hand write a letter every Sunday to his mother, my nana, who lived in Adelaide. I don't think he missed a week, ever. He could sell people on the benefits, insurance and superannuation, as we've just heard, using a blank sheet of paper and a pen. He understood the power of compound interest. He told me about that on numerous occasions. He communicated without words too. His smile, his eyes, his whistling, his hug, his handshake. He communicated love, caring, compassion, pride, friendship and warmth. As much as Dad liked telling stories, he spent more time listening than talking. He was interested in everyone and made everyone feel important and special. You might have heard some music earlier on, The Streets of London, playing by Ralph McTell. I chose that song because Dad and I went to see Ralph McTell at the Sydney Opera House back in the 1970s, and Dad loved that concert. I dragged him to a few others with louder bands, and he wasn't that keen, but he liked Ralph McTell. It was just a guitar, and he told some good stories. The song also reminds me of times we spent in London 6 or 7 years ago now, when Dad and Mum borrowed a Muse house in Knightsbridge in the autumn. And on the slideshow earlier, you might have seen some photos from that time. We had a great time visiting and getting to know London. We went to Lord's, we went to Wimbledon, we rode a ferry along the Thames, we went to Kew Gardens, we saw shows, and we had some great meals. And we had some great times in Scotland as well, when Mum and Dad made numerous visits. As well as those times in the UK together, my regular stays at St Ives over the last number of years with Mum and Dad allowed me to have more time with them than ever before. Times that Becky and I will always cherish and which have meant so much to us. Dad would set the table, he'd get the wine from the garage for dinner, he'd be asking, was it red or white tonight, or both. The mornings together, it was always coffee, generally at the car park cafe. It became a daily ritual. When Mum had been there, she got a hot chocolate with a marshmallow. So Dad thought this was a bit unfair and quizzed the server why he didn't get a marshmallow. So from that day on, Dad would get 2 marshmallows with his coffee delivered, and they loved him at the shop and sent best wishes this morning when we went there for a coffee. Dad did have a little bit of a sweet tooth, which was good because Mum was a great cook and her desserts were famous. But he loved licorice, he loved peanuts, he loved dark chocolate, and there was always a healthy stash of jelly beans in the car for trips. So Dad, Graeme, great Pa, passed away peacefully on the 26th of July after battling Alzheimer's for the last few years. I was very sad not to be there in person, but via Mum with her iPhone, her iPad, I would speak to Dad quite a lot. And even as his health deteriorated, he would listen to our conversations and say a few words. Sorry. Drink of water. His memory faded as the disease progressed, but he'll live long in our memories. And of all those people who've been lucky to be his family and friends. For all Dad's 90 years, he was a perfect gentleman. We will all miss him so much. His kindness, his wisdom, his love for Mum and family, his humour, his whistling, his stories, hospitality and his smiling face. As Andrew said, he was all you could ask for in a file and more. Our world is not going to be the same without him, but it's so much greater because of all he did for us. Thank you.
Hello. For those who are lucky enough not to know me, my name is Tony. I've been given the palette of Graeme at play. Now, one might say, what a smorgasbord. I've been limited to 3 outlets, the 3 that I shared. I have been very proud, privileged and happy to have been Graeme's friend for over 20 years. And it was through these 3 sporting outlets and social outlets that we became friends. I will say Graeme and Janet are wonderful friends, and I want to just mention 3 names. I'd like to include my wife, Elizabeth, aka Liz, who met Graeme and Janet at much the same time as I did, at Roseville Park Tennis Club. And we have become firm friends of them both through that avenue and through just because they're lovely people. And there's 2 other people here today that have been wonderful friends of Graeme and Janet, and indirectly it's part of the time of Graeme at play. And that Jane and Chris Clifford. Jane and Chris are friends of ours now through Graeme. And Jane and Chris have been very, very close. Chris was Graeme and Janet's stockbroker. Now, you might say that was Graeme at play. Indeed, it probably was. I won't go into that. Graeme had many friends. Obviously, this room is full of Graeme's friends. He didn't lack friends, and he didn't lack he deserved friends. The number of times I've heard today, he was a great man, he was a nice man, he was a thorough gentleman. That was Graeme Lumsden. I have been restricted to 3 things, and so I say when I first met Graeme had moved into Keith Street at Roseville, which was not very far from a tennis club that I have, and I'm still there, been a member of for a long, long time. Graeme came up with a group of friends who had been playing together in Linfield. They'd run out of numbers and they were looking for a tennis club to join. Now, we have a system at Roseville Park. For the first 2 or 3 weeks, we invite new people to come play with us. We have a look at them. We see whether they're up to standard. They work out whether they like us or whether we like them. Now, in Graeme's first set, and he recalled it, you're quite right, Michael, several times I've heard this story. He was put on with 2 of our colourful members. One's name was Craig and one's name was Peter. Now, Craig was tennis trained, but Craig believed in using the whole of his racket, and that meant the extremities, the shaft, and occasionally the strings. Now, if Craig hit it in the middle, dynamite. If Craig hit it off the sides, even worse. And his friend on that first set was Peter. Peter was an academic, a brilliant man. A story of a life of Peter would fill this room for many, many hours. But Peter was self-taught, absolutely the shrewdest tennis player you could imagine, could put the ball on the string and knew exactly where it was going. Unfortunately, Graeme found these 2 people very, very hard to deal with, and consequently went into the doldrums when he came off being thoroughly defeated by these 2 rather unusual players. Times got better. Graeme became a member of our club, and he became a member of our club and a much loved member of our club. His tennis was good. You're right, Michael. He was a shrewd player. He was a canny player, and he enjoyed tennis. Graeme and I had a little story that we told together about tennis. He said, Tony, we're not people that they think are silly old men, silly young men who run round a bit of greenery on the ground with white lines round it, an impediment across the middle, and take it seriously. We took it seriously because you had to take it seriously to play a game. But we enjoyed it. We went for a social experience. And I still annoy so many people at Roseville Park because I talk all the way through a set of tennis. I talk to the opposition, I talk to my partner, I tell them when it's a good shot, I tell them it's a bad shot. But it's part of the enjoyment, it's part of the social experience. Graeme and I believed tennis was a mixture of exercise, it got less and less as time's gone on, and social mixing. It has been wonderful for me. It was wonderful having Graeme for 20 odd years in that club. Graeme was our president between 2010, 2011. He had been a committee man up till then and was always there to give advice and help to younger people, new people, and exactly as Ivan mentioned, would always go out of his way to help others. He was awarded in 2017, and one of the photos up here was Graeme with a very large tray, a silver tray, what we call our Brett Hayward Award. Brett Hayward Award is given to our member of our club in each year, not the best player, but the man who has contributed most to the club in welcoming people, in enjoying, in entering into social activities. Graeme was awarded that in 2017 and it was richly deserved. He was proud of that award and we were very proud that he took that award. When I retired and sold a pharmacy, which was my wife and mine, it was in the early stages of 2005. And I remember we were having a club dinner for Roseville Park and we were sitting at a table for 4 down at St Leonard's in a restaurant. And Graeme looked at me and once again, Michael hit the nail on the head. He was a great gatherer. He knew how to get people involved in something else that he was involved in. And he said to me, "You've got a bit of time on your hands now, Tony." And I said, "Look, I've just retired. I'm only going to retire for a year, and then I'm going to go back." No, I haven't. Never will. But he said, I play tennis on a Tuesday with a group of people. He said, you'll find them, they're all men, and he said, you'll find them, they probably play a little bit of a different sort of tennis that you're used to here at Roseville. And I said, "Sounds good to me." So I went along and I was introduced to the Retired Gentlemen's Tennis Club. Now, there are 4 of us here today. The Retired Gentlemen's Tennis Club is actually, you can't say Gentlemen's Tennis Club anymore because it's not good, but we are registered with council under that name, and I do not know how we're getting away with it. But it's also can be RGTC, Retired Gentlemen's Tennis Club. It can also mean Retired Gentlemen's Talkers Club, because there is not a problem in the world that group of 12 players, mind you, out of that 12 players, 8 or 9 of us are 80 or over and have played tennis and continue to play tennis every week. But there's not a problem that we cannot solve. Between one of us, of that 12, there's a solution. I know him, he knows this, and he does a good job. They are the most amazing group of people. I've enjoyed my time there and will continue to do so. So that's 2 of my 3. Then Graeme, at the same table back at Roseville Park, said to me, "Now, I belong to Probus. Now, I'm going to be the president of this Probus Club in 2006. And this was 2005. He said, "I'd like you to come and see if you would join." And I said, "Well, I do know a little bit about Probus. I was in Rotary for 20 odd years, and it's a subsidiary of Rotary." I said, "Okay, Graeme, I'll come along." He said, I'll invite you on a visitor's day." So he invited me on a visitor's day. Liz came with me, and we sat next to a young man, and he was young, still is young in my eyes, who's Chris Clifford, that I mentioned much earlier. And we got talking to Chris. We went through this meeting of the club, and it was all men. And I sort of, they were very impressive. But on the way out to the car park, I said to Chris, "What do you think, Chris?" And he said, "Tony, what does it remind you of anything?" And I said, "Am I allowed to say a nursing home?" And he looked at me and he said, "What a good description." And I said, "But one thing, Chris, they were a group of real gentlemen." And they were. They were a lot of retired servicemen, a lot of bowlers from the local bowling club, a lot of wonderful, wonderful men. And they made up Bradfield Probus Club. Graeme became the president of that club the next year, and I think I was president about 3 or 4 years later, but that was beside the point. We, both Chris and I, are still members of that Probus group. The club has disbanded. The club failed to be liable only this year in February. A sad time, but what we've done is since then we've created our own little group of the core of the Probus Club, and we still meet every month and have lunch together. But I thoroughly enjoyed the club. A few years ago, we became a mixed club, which meant that Janet could come along, Liz could come along, and there's 2 or 3 others up there who are part of the ladies. And as it got less and less in membership, we relied more and more on the ladies. And I must admit, it was a shame when we folded. But Graeme probably didn't understand and never knew that his Probus Club was no more. But I thoroughly enjoyed my time there, and we met some very, very wonderful people. That's my Graeme at play. A great man, a nice man, a thorough gentleman, and Graeme, you will be missed by many. Thank you.
I'm back. Okay, so we're Graeme's or Pa's 3 grandchildren. So when it came to writing this speech, Jack, Isabel and I spent some time reminiscing about our favourite memories of Pa. Through this time reminiscing, it became pretty clear that I unfortunately didn't inherit Pa's amazing long-term memory, and Isabel definitely has. My memories of Pa from when I was a really little girl revolve around being pretty amazed at his ability to whistle, which for anyone lucky enough to hear, it was pretty incredible and he had a pretty amazing range. I also clearly remember how he made me feel every time we went over to stay at Beemar and Pa's. He was warm, he gave big cuddles, and he always let me sit on his knee. Whew, sorry, I did get Dad's tears, unfortunately. As I got older, I realised how cool it was to have a Pa who played tennis every week.
Where are you? Pa definitely passed down his love of sport onto me and Dad, me being Sophie, but also me. Pa watched me play countless games, and I always loved seeing him outside the court. But I loved having a hit with him. Granted, he did get a bit older, and it became a little bit easier to win, as he didn't really move much from the centre of the court. But it was always great, and I always found it a lot of fun playing tennis with Pa.
Sorry. Okay. More recently, in his later years, my fondest memories were really the simple things. Slowly walking with him to his favourite coffee shop for an extra hot coffee with a marshmallow. Sorry, I can't.
Just pretend it's Robin's speech. Yes, slowly walking him to his favourite coffee shop for an extra hot coffee with a marshmallow, and listening to Pa tell his stories about what it was like to work at MLC before computers and the internet, and his memories of courting Beemar, a word that we don't use very often anymore, but it's lovely stories. I'll cherish these memories. I know how lucky I am to have been able to have these moments and conversations with my grandpa as an adult. I also feel lucky I was old enough to really notice and appreciate the deep affection of all who came into contact with Pa, for Pa. You could tell from the neighbours stopping on the street to have a chat with him, on our walks, the coffee shop knowing his order, and most recently the staff at Wahroonga House and how they all just loved him. I'm grateful for all those quieter moments and conversations we had together, and I'm grateful to have had the best Pa going around. I'll miss him lots.
Sorry, I failed.
It's a bit tough going when you're asked to speak, well, second last, because a lot of the stories have been touched on, but hopefully I can add a little bit. When I was looking over the memories that I'd jotted down, I'm not sure if this says more about myself or Pa, but there's 2 themes: food and football. One of my earliest memories of Pa was a trip into town. Beemar and Pa used to take us into town on the train, and I loved trains when I was young, so it was always a great day out. And we went to the Powerhouse Museum. I'm not sure Beemar was there that day. It might have just been Pa and myself and maybe Sophie or Isabel. And at the end of an hour or two at the museum, Pa was craving a milkshake. He loved a chocolate milkshake. And he couldn't think of anywhere to get one, but we walked past a McDonald's. So we went into McDonald's and Pa asked them if they had milkshakes, and they said, no, we only have thick shakes. And Pa found that a bit strange. He didn't know what a thick shake was. But he said, is it like a milkshake? And they said yes. So he ordered a chocolate thick shake from McDonald's. He wasn't impressed. He couldn't get the liquid out of the straw. There was too much ice cream in it. And he said he'd never order one of those again. So I don't know why, but that's one of my very earliest memories of Pa, and it's a good memory. When I was also jotting down some points to talk about today, I remembered a piece of advice that Pa gave me. I think I must have been in school in about year 9, or height of awkwardness, not a lot of confidence, didn't like public speaking at all. And Pa told me there's 2 things to remember. Don't talk too fast and take time to pause. And that's something I've always tried to remember since then. And he had authority to give advice on public speaking, because as everyone's heard and everyone here today knows, he was just a great storyteller. And one of those stories which I loved, and obviously I knew that Dad loved as well, was the boundary umpiring story. And I gave Beemar a call about that story a couple of days ago because I couldn't quite remember all the details that Dad put forward. So I'm glad that Dad did the extra research and the Googling, and I won't take you through it all again because it would probably be a little bit inaccurate, but the gist of it was the same. But I did find out one extra important point about that story from Beemar, as we call Janet. And that was that there was a controversial call at the end of the game made by Pa, or perhaps it was just because it was such a close finish that everyone at work was talking about the result on the Monday. Beemar was working at ETSA at the time, the Electricity Trust of South Australia, and in the common area of the workplace or in the kitchen, there was a lot of talk about the umpiring in that game. And some people weren't so happy that the Victorian team had come and won. I'm pretty sure I'm right in saying that Beemar and Pa weren't married at that stage. And I believe there may have been somewhat of an ultimatum from Beemar to Pa that she wasn't sure how it would go being married to an umpire, if this was the sort of thing she had to routinely deal with on a Monday at work. So Pa ended up giving away the umpiring, but as we've heard, he kept a keen interest in football, Australian football, and I could always count on Pa, but also Beemar, to be on the sideline of my games as I played football mainly in Sydney, and it was always a great thing to look up and see your 2 grandparents on the sideline, give them a little wave when you were walking out to the centre or whatever it was, and yeah, it was always just great memories. And Beemar and Pa was so supportive of everything I did. I remember when I was about 16, there was this thing that happened where there was a few people that got to go and train at the SCG with a few of the Essendon coaches. I think they were trying to grow the game in Sydney, and at the end of the training, Pa, of course, was there to watch and to support me, as he always did, and Kevin Sheedy was there in the grandstand. He gave us a little spiel. Some of the 16-year-olds, he spoke to us and gave us some words. But before that, Pa was sitting somewhere close to him, I think with Dad as well, in the grandstand of the SCG, and Pa struck up a conversation with Sheeds, as he could with anyone. He was so comfortable talking to anybody, and started talking to him about James Hird and whether he thought Hirdy should retire, and Sheedy told him, no, I'm trying to trying to get him to go on for another year. It ended up that they both retired at the end of the year together, Sheedy and Hurd. One thing Pa didn't tell Kevin Sheedy that day was something that he had recounted to me many times before, and that was that when he was going to games as a supporter in Adelaide at the Adelaide Oval, and when Sheedy was there as, I think, coach, or maybe he was playing, he'd yell out, "Dirty Sheedy." So he kept that quiet from him, but he liked telling me that story. Back to food, somewhat related to football as well, and that was, I always remember Pa, whenever we went to a game of football at the SCG, we'd get him a pie and he'd eat it and he'd say, "It's not bad, but I wish I could get a pasty like I could in South Australia." And he'd always tell me that you can only buy a good pasty in South Australia. So whenever I'm in Adelaide or somewhere down that way, I'll always try and get a pasty and I'll remember Pa. Pa was a great role model for me, and it's amazing how consistent what I've written down is with what everyone else has said about him as a man. He was a true gentleman. He was extremely humble, and he had a very kind way about him. If he didn't know something, he would say that he didn't know it. And if he thought he wasn't much good at something, he'd say, "Oh, I'm not much good at that, Jack." Often with a wry smile, and often he actually was pretty good at it. But he had this way of being self-effacing, being able to show vulnerability, and in doing so, he made everyone feel comfortable around him. And those are the qualities that I'll remember. Beamer and Pa have just been the greatest grandparents anyone could ask for. I'll always remember those Sunday night dinners. And Pa, I love you very much. Thank you.
My earliest memories are of spending time with Beamer and Pa at Keith Street, sleepovers and adventure days in the school holidays. The three of us walking to Roseville Park with Pa, with a little wooden paddle and a tennis ball. I don't know why we didn't have a cricket bat, but we just had this little paddle, and we'd go to the cricket nets and spend the afternoon playing cricket with Pa. We'd go bushwalking in Ku-ring-gai National Park, and we'd have picnics on those secret harbour beaches that Robin mentioned in her speech. Pa was there for all the big events throughout my school days, from Saturday sports to school plays. He always supported us and made sure we knew how proud he was. As adults, Jack and I were lucky enough to get to spend a weekend with Beamer and Pa in Amsterdam. I don't think there's many 20-something-year-olds who can say they spent a weekend in Amsterdam, of all places, with their 80-year-old grandparents. It was a really special time. We visited the tulip gardens and explored the city together, having picnics in parks, visiting museums, eating delicious food and wine in dimly lit hole-in-the-wall restaurants. And there's a photo of Pa with a massive plate of food somewhere in Amsterdam, with a big smile on his face up there. Beamer and Pa's love of travel and adventure has rubbed off on all of us, and I can only hope to still be exploring the world long into my 80s as they were. More recently, I'll treasure the moments that Pa got to have with his great-grandchildren, Ella, George and Harry. Baby Ella sitting on Pa's knee on his big leather recliner, smiling up at him with glee as he whistled. Sorry, I can't read it because there's tears in my eyes. Sorry. He let her paint his fingernails bright blue. I had written pink, but actually the photo's blue. Taking her up and down the elevator in their Stanley Street house as many times as she wanted. Pushing her pram around Woolies. Pa cuddling George as a newborn baby. Wackadoo Isabel, he's a good little chap, isn't he? Letting George help him blow out his birthday candles. Seeing Pa light up with a smile as he watched the kids playing at his feet when we went to visit at Wahroonga House. And meeting Harry just a few months ago. Pa looked at me in wonder at his 90th birthday celebration. Are all of those kids yours, Isabel? But when I think of Pa, the Pa I remember the most is Sunday dinner Pa. Those Sunday dinners all sort of blur together. There were so many of them over the years. Usually there was a beautiful dinner cooked by Beamer or Mum. The table was always set with a tablecloth, napkins and soup spoons. Pa sitting at the head of the table, sprinkling sugar on the iceberg lettuce in his salad. Beamer telling him off. When I think of those dinners, I don't only think of Beamer's sticky date pudding, which is the best in the world. I think of Pa telling stories. A master storyteller and rememberer of the little details. Pa would get a particular smile on his face as he prepared to tell a story. You know the one. A little cheeky and full of anticipation as to how his audience would react to the story or joke he was about to tell. This is the Pa I will remember. One such joke that he would often tell us as kids was about the pelican. A curious bird, the pelican. Its beak can hold more than its belly can. Whenever I see a pelican, I always think of that rhyme and of Pa. After Pa passed away, Ella and I decided that every time we see a pelican, we're going to think of Pa. And I really hope that all of you will do the same. Thank you.
Instead of lengthy church prayer, may I invite you hold in your heart this wonderful Lumsden family in your loving heart. Please join me to offer Lord's Prayer. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as in heaven. Give us today our daily bread. Forgive us our sins as we forgive those who sin against us. Save us from the time of trial and deliver us from evil. For the kingdom, the power, and glory are yours, now and forever. Amen.
So one thing Dad told me was never be repetitive. So I'm going to repeat his final speech at his 90th birthday. It was, thank you all for coming. I hope you all enjoy yourself. So there's food and drink up the back. Feel free to stay and have some of it. We're paying it for it, so it's all free for you. And thank you everybody who's helped Mum and Dad and the rest of the family over our lives. There's been many, particularly the people at Warunga House and at Karingai Neighbourhood Centre. Thank you all to the staff here, to Josh who's doing the live stream video, to Yang Ray for his spiritual and Christian support. It's been wonderful. Okay, that's it.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you. You're going to stay for a bit or you're going to get help? Thank you very much. Well done. Well done.
That's George. I think there's one of you and Marilyn there somewhere.
You must wait there.
I reckon it was at the hospital. Oh, there's Cambridge. There, that's me. That's Tumbie Bay. You know what they did? They come with us, their friends. And I put on lunch for them. They thought I was wonderful, but I couldn't get my hand with this was have we changed over the years? They could turn the camera off. I hate standing up there and shooting. What's that? No, you don't. Janet does, but Jen, what's your thing?